Some conversations disappear almost immediately. You forget the words, you forget the details, you forget how they ended. And then there are the conversations that refuse to leave. A comment made years ago, a moment you barely understood at the time, a few sentences that somehow continue living in your mind long after everyone else has moved on. You revisit them while driving, while taking a shower, while trying to fall asleep, and every time they return, the same question appears. Why am I still thinking about this? Most people assume the answer is simple. They believe they are replaying the conversation because they wish they had said something different, something smarter, something better. But what if that isn't the real reason? What if the conversation itself is not what keeps returning? Because if that were true, every uncomfortable conversation would stay with us. But most don't. Most disappear. The ones that stay are different, and they stay for a reason. Think about the conversations you remember most clearly. Often they are connected to embarrassment, regret, disappointment, rejection, or moments that changed the way you saw yourself. The words matter, but they are not usually the thing that remains. What remains is the feeling, the emotional impact, the part of the experience that never fully settled. This is why two people can walk away from the same conversation carrying completely different memories. One person forgets it by the next day. The other remembers it for years. Not because the conversation was objectively important, but because it touched something emotionally significant, something that still feels unresolved. And that changes everything. Because the mind is not always trying to remember. Sometimes it is trying to understand. Most conversations fade. The ones that stay are usually trying to tell us something, not about the other person, but about ourselves. And this is where many people become trapped. They believe they are replaying the conversation because they are searching for the perfect response, the perfect explanation, the perfect version of events. But what the mind is often searching for is meaning. Because the conversation may be over, but the interpretation is still active. Part of you is still trying to decide what the experience meant, what it revealed, what it proved, or what it threatened. The conversation ended. The interpretation didn't. And something surprising happens when you look closely. The conversations that stay with us are rarely the worst ones. They are usually the unfinished ones. Not necessarily the most painful, not necessarily the most dramatic, the unfinished ones. The explanation you never received, the apology that never came, the question that remained unanswered, the feeling that something was left incomplete. Sometimes the most powerful part of a conversation is not what was said, it's what was never said, what never happened, what never arrived. And because there was no ending, the mind keeps searching for one. This is why replaying conversations can become exhausting. You're not simply remembering. You're repeatedly returning to something that still feels open, still feels unresolved, still feels unfinished. But eventually the experience becomes even more personal, because at a certain point, you are no longer arguing with the conversation. You are arguing with yourself. You are arguing with the conclusions you drew afterward, the judgments you made, the meaning you attached to the experience. You're not arguing with the past, you're arguing with yourself. And over time, something subtle begins to happen. The conversation becomes larger than the conversation. It becomes a symbol. Maybe it becomes proof that you were not enough. Maybe it becomes proof that you missed your chance. Maybe it becomes proof that someone saw you in a way you never wanted to be seen. Maybe it becomes connected to a wound that existed long before that moment happened. A wound the conversation merely exposed. At that point, you are no longer remembering words. You are remembering meaning. And that may be the most important thing to understand. The mind doesn't replay conversations. It replays unresolved meaning. It returns to experiences that still seem incomplete, experiences that still appear to contain something important, something that has not yet been fully understood. And until that meaning becomes clear, the mind continues returning, not because it wants to suffer, but because it wants resolution. Perhaps this is why certain conversations stay with us for so long, not because they changed our lives, but because they revealed something about us that we were not ready to see. So, maybe the question is not, why do I keep replaying this conversation? Maybe the better question is, what does this conversation still mean to me? Because when the meaning finally becomes clear, the need to revisit the moment begins to fade. Not because the conversation disappears, but because it no longer needs to explain itself. The conversation may be over, but until its meaning is understood, the mind will keep returning. And sometimes, understanding that meaning is what finally allows you to move forward. If this reflection resonated with you, consider subscribing to Quiet Clarity for more explorations into the hidden patterns behind thought, emotion, and human behavior.